Welcome to my channel. In this video, we will be talking about taking tranquilizers during the treatment of anxiety disorders. Should you take them? What are the pros and cons? Let's take the example of a benzodiazepine drug, Xanax. Why Xanax specifically? Well, probably because it's the most popular pill for people with anxiety disorders. Because, strangely enough, it actually helps. Yes, in reality, when you are faced with your anxiety, with your panic attacks, with the fear of death, the fear of going crazy, various physical sensations, tachycardia, constant fluctuations in blood pressure, insomnia, states of depersonalization and derealization, and persistent unfounded anxiety, naturally you are frightened by this condition and start going to doctors. You keep running from one place to another, undergoing various examinations, taking tests, and they tell you that you are healthy. They simply say you have an anxiety disorder, you end up seeing a psychotherapist, and you are prescribed tranquilizers or antidepressants, or both at the same time, but here we will only discuss tranquilizers. So you are prescribed a tranquilizer, you take the pill, and miracle of miracles, you start to feel a bit better. Panic attacks become less frequent, the anxiety inexplicably subsides, you start sleeping, your overall well-being improves, and you even begin to feel some sense of mood. And then the time comes, a week or two has passed, and it's time to stop taking the medication. You lower the dose and you start feeling bad again. And why is that? Because Xanax does not treat anxiety disorder at all, in any way. It simply suppresses your symptoms. It's the same as taking a painkiller for a bad tooth. You will keep taking it, numbing the pain, until you eventually go to the dentist and either get the tooth treated or have it removed altogether. It's the same here. You'll keep taking Xanax until either your anxiety-inducing situation in life resolves itself or some miracle happens and your life changes while you're taking Xanax. You stopped taking the medication and you didn't feel worse. Do you think you were getting better because of Xanax? Actually, no. As a matter of fact, while you were taking Xanax, let's say you were really afraid to change jobs. But you went ahead anyway, even though you felt uncertain, and you finally made that big career move. You were afraid to get a job. Here's another scenario. Let's say you feel bad all the time, you have panic attacks. You take Xanax, you start to feel better, you find a job. You start working. In reality, the stress was because you didn't have any money. But once you got a job, you had money. The stressful situation was resolved. And again, it seems like Xanax helped here, although in reality it just gave you courage. Courage. The absence of symptoms, the absence of fear. So this also happens when a person changes their life while on the medication because they no longer feel fear. And when they stop taking it, they don't become dependent on the drug because they feel fine without it as well. There are such cases, and that's a fact. But in the vast majority of cases, this simply does not happen at all. In particular, the following situation occurs. He takes Xanax, continues to take it over and over again, and he starts to feel just a little bit better than before. Then comes the time to stop taking the medication because, as we know, dependence develops. So they stop taking the medication, start feeling bad again, take the medication again, then stop again. You start feeling bad again, and this will go on endlessly until you find the cause of your anxiety and eliminate it. Once you eliminate it, you won't even need to take medication. Until then, you will keep taking it over and over, and you could very well become dependent. So we're not talking about the kind of addiction that most people think of, like a drug addict who simply abuses a substance. In fact, because of such abuse, this medication started being prescribed less frequently. Because they drink to catch that kind of euphoria, they take Xanax by the handful, and some even mix it with alcohol to get that high. It's a strange sensation, and it can even lead to fatal outcomes. Because it is strictly prohibited to take Xanax with alcohol. You could quite literally stop breathing and die. That's all there is to it. That's it. Due to these cases, Xanax prescriptions are now more strictly controlled. Here we won't be discussing true addiction, like that of a drug addict. Someone who takes huge doses? We'll be talking about an ordinary person with an anxiety disorder. I'm specifically singling out a few of these individuals. In other words, these are the people who are taking Xanax. Let's say regularly, but just one pill a day. The second type are those people who take Xanax when they're hit by a panic attack. When it happens, they immediately look for that pill. And third, those who take the medication from time to time, say something happens at work, some stress or tension, so they pop a pill, then maybe another one a week later, or maybe 2 weeks later, or even just once a month. So that's how it is. Actually, I want to clarify here that among people with anxiety disorders, very few develop a severe dependence on Xanax. Because strangely enough, they're afraid of it. Yes, they're afraid of becoming dependent. Look at yourselves. Who here takes Xanax? When you take that pill, you're already worried that you've become dependent on it. You'll be splitting the tablet into quarters, taking it in tiny doses that don't really help at all. But at the same time, strangely enough, you'll actually be doing the right thing, being afraid of dependence. In reality, as we've already discussed, there's a low chance that you'll become dependent. Dependence develops when taking large doses. For a long period of time, meaning from a month and longer, when taking 4 milligrams or more per day. But how many of you actually take 5 milligrams a day? Over the course of several months, only a handful of people do. In reality, most people just break the tablet into tiny pieces, take it once a week, maybe twice a week at most. But there are people who, let's say, take a tablet every day on a regular basis. What does this mean? This indicates that such a person does not work on their anxiety, does not correct their mistakes, and does not engage in self-improvement. They're not doing anything at all. They're just taking the pill. They suppress this condition and keep on living, well, surviving, so to speak. Why is this bad? I'll tell you why taking pills like this has a negative effect, because it weakens a person's willpower. Such a person will very rarely pull themselves together and work on their anxiety independently. They're already used to it. It's easier for them to just take a pill and continue living with this discomfort. In fact, life is more or less comfortable because after taking the pill, this condition becomes dulled and you can more or less live, so to speak. But the problem with Xanax is the following. The more often you take it, the more you take, the less it works on you over time. And whether you want to or not, you'll have to increase the dose. As we can understand, this way you can end up developing a dependency. That's why, for those people who are taking Xanax on a regular basis, so to speak, I still recommend gradually tapering off until you start to feel the symptoms. Yes, well, you can keep taking it in small doses for now, that's fine. But when you start to feel the symptoms, when you feel anxiety or panic attacks, you can begin to work through them. And gradually, little by little, you'll come off the medication. That's the only way. And you'll fix your life. Otherwise, it will simply never end. You'll just feel worse and worse, and you'll have to take more and more. Now let's look at the second scenario. Those people who take Xanax during a panic attack, I've already mentioned this in my videos before. Please understand, it's useless. When you're hit by a panic attack, a chemical reaction takes place in your body. You experience an adrenaline rush, so you'll already be shaking. By the time you take the pill and it starts working, an hour will have passed. During that hour, your panic attack will have already happened. You'll have already been shaken up. So basically, taking the pill itself is essentially useless, because while you're waiting for it to work, you'll be suffering for that whole hour. The only real advantage in this situation is that when the pill does kick in, it won't let you spiral further, meaning you'll calm down. And for the most part, another panic attack won't happen while the pill is working, so that's how it is. But if you work through your panic, like I show in my videos on my channel, you won't need to take a pill, because that's exactly the state we need. When you take a pill, you are essentially protecting yourself from further panic attacks. But that's not what we want. We actually need those attacks in order to learn how to deal with them. The third type of people are those who take Xanax from time to time. So, for example, there's stress at work. Boom, they take a pill. Or maybe they can't sleep properly for a couple of nights. Pop, they take a pill, get some sleep, and rest. They need to go to a job interview, an exam, and so on. They take a pill to avoid getting nervous. In other words, they take pills situationally. There are both pros and cons to this approach. The downside is that we really need to learn to handle these situations on our own. After all, we have to keep living our lives. You can't always be carrying pills around with you every time there's some stress at work, right? Well, fine, work through it at home. What's wrong? Why am I so anxious? There are plenty of methods to get rid of insomnia. If you feel tense, do some relaxation exercises. In other words, learn to relieve stress on your own. Yes, such people do not become addicted to Xanax. You know, there are hundreds, even thousands of people who take Xanax. At the same time, they're not dependent on it, because a person can easily go without it for a month or two. So what kind of dependence are we talking about? A truly dependent person is someone who takes it constantly on a regular basis. That's why when taking tranquilizers, you really need to use your head. If I see that I can't manage without it, then I need to do something about it. You need to get rid of neurosis, work through it, correct your thinking errors, eliminate stressful situations in your life, and work through them as well, and you need to change your life. And as soon as you do that, you won't need these pills, because as long as you keep taking them, you won't change your life. Because when you're on the pills, it kind of feels like, well, it's okay, you can live like this. But in that state, you very rarely change anything. For those who take pills during a panic attack, understand that it's useless as long as you're still processing it. Your panic attack will already hit you and shake you up. Nothing worse will happen, but the next day you'll be walking in the same place. You'll get hit again and you'll take another pill, but this can go on endlessly. And for those who take it occasionally, you still need to learn to cope with stress. You need to understand what brings you into that state. It is quite common to hear people claim and argue that Xanax will make you physically addicted and that you'll eventually become dependent. But you and I both know many hundreds of different individuals who have been taking Xanax for a very long time now. At the same time, they take it from time to time and do not increase the dosage. Yes, there are people who take a pill once a week for 5 to 6 years and nothing terrible happens to them. Then they successfully stop taking these pills altogether by working through their anxiety and basically go on living healthy lives. There are plenty of such examples as well. That's why I want to say that tranquilizers will never cure anyone of anxiety or anxiety disorders. Never. But in some cases, when a person is truly already mentally and physically exhausted, they take a pill, get some sleep, and eat. This is already important. That is, at certain stages, taking tranquilizers is quite justified. For example, if a person is the sole breadwinner in the family, and if he leaves his job because he is constantly suffocated by panic attacks and blood pressure spikes. He feels like he's dying every day, calls an ambulance to work, he's about to quit, and if he does quit, the whole family will be left without money, yes? How will they live on? This is also a concern. Taking a tranquilizer may be justified here because the person can stay at work, at least somehow get by. Because if he quits his job and falls into an anxiety disorder, in the end he'll just stay at home. And then who knows how many years people who are severely tormented by insomnia will have to endure. Yes, for those whose days and nights have already switched places, who can no longer fall asleep normally. Taking that same tranquilizer can help teach a person to sleep at the same time every day. Today he fell asleep, tomorrow he fell asleep at the same time on the third day. Then you can stop taking the tranquilizer and in this way normalize your daily routine faster than if you just tried on your own. If you don't use pharmacology, that is, everything can be done with your mind, you can take Xanax or not take it at all. A person should make this decision themselves because not every doctor will understand your situation. In fact, to be honest, most psychotherapists don't really care about you or your problems. You come in, complain, and they either prescribe you pills or psychotherapy. They spend some time with you, but what happens to you afterwards? Nobody cares. They tell you, just endure the panic attack, don't take any pills. But that's because they've never experienced it themselves. Someone who hasn't gone through it will never truly understand you. A psychotherapist who has never personally experienced a panic attack or lived for days, years, or even 10 years in a constant state of unfounded anxiety will never understand that you would do anything to get rid of it, no matter what it takes. We're talking about some kind of medication dependency here. Many people just want to take that pill just to get rid of this state. Personally, I am a proponent of getting out of this state without medication, of course. But I always say that there are cases where taking medication is not just necessary, it can actually significantly speed up your recovery from this. So why should we miss out on such an opportunity? You only get one life. But if you have a serious disorder, you can't eat, you can't drink, you're losing your mind, right? In this case, taking a tranquilizer for a certain period is justified in order to get the person back on their feet, so that they can physically recover, at least to the point where they're not just lying in bed anymore, not checking their blood pressure every minute. Here, it can be prescribed to someone who is already worn out by daily anxiety. So he lashes out at his loved ones, and although he seems to be following all the recommended behavioral and thinking techniques, the anxiety still clings to him and won't let go. This process can be interrupted with a pill by taking Xanax. He realizes, now that I've taken it, I'll keep practicing the same techniques I was using, but now I truly understand that this is anxiety. This is anxiety. I calmed down thanks to the pill, and the anxiety went away. So now I'll focus more on my exercise. I'll try harder to stay in the here and now so I don't fall back into that state. And the anxiety will also go away faster than if you try to fight it on your own. That's also a fact. So friends, whether or not to take tranquilizers is entirely your personal choice. Of course, I would recommend not turning to pharmacology under any circumstances. But as we understand, there are severe cases where it's very difficult to get out on your own. First of all, I'll say that you can get out of any situation on your own, but sometimes it's just foolish to suffer if you can help yourself with a pill. There are cases when a person can't eat, drink or sleep and is morally and physically exhausted. Why torment them? In such cases, of course, you can take medication for a certain period of time, restore your strength, and then continue to work on yourself independently. Without any pharmacology, in other words, you need to assess the situation each time. Can you really cope without medication? If you can, then there's no need to even consider it. I'm talking about tranquilizers and antidepressants. If you take them from time to time, you still need to learn how to cope with stress on your own, to learn how to relax so as not to let stress build up, so that you don't end up relying on a pill to relieve it, because that's not a real solution either. If you start experiencing a lot of stress at once, you'll just end up taking pills all the time and become dependent on them again. So the point is, you really need to learn and work on yourself independently. If you take a tranquilizer to get rid of a panic attack, that's also pointless. Yes, in that case, you won't become physically dependent, you won't develop a drug addiction, but you'll end up with a psychological dependence on the pill. In other words, you won't be able to go on the subway or anywhere else without it. If you get hit with a panic attack in those places without the pill, why do you need that? It's much easier to work through it instead. Of course, it's harder to work through it than to just take a pill, but it's better and more correct to get rid of it once and for all rather than carrying that pill in your pocket for decades. That's why you should always think 10 times in favor of working through it on your own. If that's not possible and it's really difficult, you can take the medication, but only under supervision. It's always better when it's prescribed by a doctor. To sum up what was said above, let's talk about the downsides. First of all, Xanax does not treat anxiety in any way, absolutely not. It only suppresses the symptoms. And that's why, after you stop taking it, you will usually find yourself back at square one. And second, there is a risk of becoming dependent. But this isn't the kind of dependence that many people imagine, like becoming an addict, swallowing handfuls of pills, and then experiencing withdrawal symptoms without them. No, it's not quite like that. As a matter of fact, there is a very strong possibility here that you will not be able to manage or overcome this anxiety entirely on your own without professional help. It will just be easier for you to take that pill and not worry about it, instead of doing exercises, reflecting and so on. So you take the pill, you feel more or less tolerable, everything is bearable, and you decide to keep living like that. And you won't make any effort to solve your problems. This is a really big downside, and that's why people get hooked on Xanax. They're willing to take it for years just to avoid working on themselves. So basically, that's all for the downsides. Nothing else particularly terrible happens. What about the advantages? Sometimes, thanks to Xanax, it is sometimes possible to bring a person out of a severe state when they are no longer able to do anything on their own, just lying there, completely exhausted both morally and physically. There is an opportunity to eliminate these symptoms, to get rid of these sensations with a pill, restore their strength, and then continue treatment independently, that is, without the use of pharmaceuticals. And next, when a person is in a state of overwhelming anxiety, when they're really struggling even though they seem to be doing all the exercises, somehow, month after month goes by and there's no improvement. The habit has consumed the person so much, this anxious habit. And taking even a minimal dose of Xanax makes a person feel like, boom, oh, everything's gone. Damn, this is actually the problem. Yes, it's psychological, everything is gone for me. I'll continue working on it. Now I'll regain a bit of strength. Things have gotten a little easier. Now I understand that. There is a way out of this, there is. If the pill worked and I felt better, it means I can continue this, do it on my own, and get rid of these symptoms. In other words, it shows the person that the process is actually reversible. A person understands this and then moves forward with renewed strength. You might have noticed, for those who have been hospitalized or stayed in the hospital, almost always they give you Xanax. At night, for those who sleep poorly, they just give you half a tablet. If someone has a troubling, some kind of strong symptom, if you're feeling bad, if your heart hurts, you've been examined and everything seems fine, but your heart still hurts, it just keeps hurting. So what do? You take a shot, maybe half a Xanax tablet, your heart calms down, the problem goes away, everything is clear here, we keep working on it, and as you can see from my video about Xanax, a brain reset. So when a person experiences constant daily anxiety, sometimes it might be possible to take that same tranquilizer pill, feel some relief and realize, I really do feel better, I feel great. The problem is psychological. And notice how after that the focus shifts from anxiety to our present day. While under the effect of the pill, you'll already be doing something, taking some action. The next day you'll already be doing it automatically. Doing that something. Sometimes anxious thoughts will catch up with you, but you'll push them aside a bit, staying in the here and now, continuing to act and live in the present day, trying not to worry. So with this kind of reset, let's say, we slightly improve our well-being. Wishing everyone good luck and good health. Write in the comments what you think about this topic in general and how things are going for you with this medication. I wish everyone health and happiness. See you. Bye.